All right. So this next one is a very specific claim, short clip, relatively short, about your proficiency in ancient literacy studies and stuff.
Yeah, this is funny. All right.
My point was, usually when they bring up the illiteracy of the disciples, aren't they usually talking about whether the disciples could write? Because it seems to me like in this blog, Carrier's talking about whether they could read. So he says, for example, it's not even credible they were fishermen. Paul never mentions it, nor First Clement or Hebrews or any defensible early texts. And then he goes on to say, Paul would have made hay out of the fact that all over his epistles, because that would mean he alone and not they could read the scriptures, which he attests was absolutely essential to demonstrate faith. Go on.
Yeah, no. So this is one of these places where I feel like Carrier has not carefully enough done his homework. And I checked after I read this. I went and looked in his book to see if he has actually consulted any of the far-reaching literacy studies of the period. Catherine Hetcher wrote a monumental book back in 2006. More recently, Mike Wise has written on this, I think in 2019. So there's a lot that he's taking for granted here in terms of, I mean, there's several things going on. What does it mean to be literate versus illiterate within this culture? People could read things and never have any mechanical ability at all, or even conceptual ability at all to actually write or compose literature. That's one of the disconnects. But I think one of the things that gets missed here is just that for the vast majority of people, yes, literacy rates in the area at the period were very low in terms of people's ability to actually read and actually write. But the vast majority of people did not experience or learn scripture by reading it. People were sitting in synagogues and listening to others read these texts all the time. This is how people came to experience this literature. So even if you couldn't read, that doesn't mean anything with regards to your ability or your effectiveness to take ideas that you've heard in the synagogue and texts that you know about without even necessarily having to be able to read them. They're there, and using those to interpret your world around you. And then there's one other thing I want to say here on this point as well. And that is this idea that somehow Paul's social status would have been guaranteed within the church on the basis of his ability to read, even if he was the only one who could do so, is silly. And in fact, I think a strong case can be made that one of the reasons he does emphasize his commitment to what's written in the scriptures, a case could be made that the reason he does so as strenuously as he does is because this wasn't the great flex that he thought it was among the people in the Jerusalem church. One of the things that we do know is that there was not, certainly in many segments of society, there was not a great stigma attached to one's inability to read.
That last argument I don't understand. So he's trying to argue that Paul repeatedly relies on citations of scripture because no one cared about citations of scripture. Am I reading that wrong? Is that what he argued, or can you steel man his argument for me? Like,
no, I don't think that you're wrong. I mean, that's what I got out of it.
Yeah,
so
that was a dumb argument. There's a ton of things wrong. Like almost everything he said is wrong, like wildly wrong. But the most embarrassing thing here is, I hate doing this, but he's forcing me to fucking do this because he challenged my ignorance on this. Okay. Here we go. Are we ready? So I got my PhD at Columbia University. My PhD advisor, my graduate studies advisor through the whole program for like 10 years, 11 years, was William V. Harris, who was literally the world's leading expert on ancient literacy. He wrote the definitive textbook on ancient literacy. Kipp Davis mentions Catherine Hetzer, who wrote a book on literacy in Judea, like for the Hebrews. Hetzer just takes Harris's work and expands it to Palestine, and she gets no different results than him. So she basically corroborates everything he found. I also took multiple graduate level courses for my PhD program under Raffaella Cribiori, who's one of the world's leading experts on ancient education. And I read her books on this, and I wrote one of the chapters of my dissertation, my PhD dissertation at Columbia University, an Ivy League school, was on ancient education. And I republished that chapter as a book, Science Education in the Early Roman Empire. All right, I fucking know what I'm talking about. And I can confirm that everything Kipp Davis said is bullshit. No, not everything. I'll say not every single thing, because, he said a few things that are true. Like, most people are illiterate. A lot of people get information through oral lore. I have a whole section in Science Education in the Early Roman Empire, which is that one little book on ancient education. I have a section in there on how illiterate juries at trials could actually absorb scientific information through certain trials, scientific information. They actually did have things like doctors could do things like autopsies and stuff and report scientific evidence for cases in criminal cases. It's extremely rare. It didn't happen commonly. But anyway, I talk about it, right? Anyway, so what did Harris and Cribiori definitely instill in me personally through my direct apprenticeship with them and through their books? Several things. One of which is that we know from both science and extensive cross-cultural history and ancient evidence that what Kipp is talking about is literally impossible. It is not possible to, quote unquote, have heard the entire Old Testament spoken out to you somehow. I don't know how this is, he hasn't really thought through the logistics of this. Like, how many Sundays, or Saturdays in this case, do you have to go to synagogue to hear, at what point do you hear the whole Torah read, right? Like how crazy do you have to be to have done this? But anyway, how long of a life would it take? But anyway, even if you do it, we know for a fact that intellectually it is not possible to remember all of that information in the way that is used in what's called Pesher, which is a particular style of interpreting interlocking scriptures to find hidden meanings, which is what the Christians are doing. All throughout Paul, he talks about how Christians are reading new meanings into ancient scriptures, and he can quote them verbatim. And he talks about how the evidence for the gospel and the charisma of Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, comes from scripture. We can verify it from scripture and so on. So my argument, and they only talk about half the evidence I gave in the article. They skipped the other half. But this is the one that they actually talk about some of the evidence that I gave. But the others, they don't hardly at all. But in this one, they at least touch on some of it. They don't talk about all of it. But the argument is that it is very clear that Christianity was absolutely dependent on the ability to read the scriptures and to read them in interlocking complex relationships that requires literacy. There's no way to learn how to do this. If you're just some illiterate person, you don't have the skills for doing this, even mentally, much less physically in terms of writing and reading. You need actually the ability to do symbolism and phonemes. Writing is actually crucial to the actual intellectual process that's necessary to do the kinds of things that we see in the Christian Pesher logic that we see in Paul. Again, this is Harris, Cribiori, they all explain this. You can't do these things without an extensive education, which means if Jesus was historical, he had to have been a rabbi. He had to have been an educated rabbi, because there weren't separate schools. There wasn't a school that drilled you in oral lore and didn't teach you to read the Torah. There were schools that drilled you in oral lore. That's how the Mishnah was memorized and transmitted through the rabbinical schools. But you went as a child at age 7 and you spent 7+ years having this drilled into you. You had to have it. You had extensive education to memorize the Mishnah. Only extensively, institutionally educated people could do this. Those same schools also taught you how to read and write in Hebrew and learn the Torah, because there's no such thing as separate schools for this. One school did both things. So there's no way to get the one skill and not get the other. So the point is that Paul makes it very clear that the scriptures are absolutely essential to constructing Christianity and making arguments for anything in Christianity. This means that the first apostles cannot possibly have been illiterate, because had they been, Paul could be saying this all the time. It's they can't even read the scriptures. The scriptures are the secret oracles of God. I can read the scriptures, so I know more than these guys. He never says that. He actually is deferential to them. He complains about people saying that they're more charismatic and rhetorically skilled than him, actually. So actually, he complains about them being more educated than him, which is the opposite of what Kipp Davis is saying. But anyway, the point being is that the evidence is quite clear that it is impossible for the first apostles to have been illiterate fishermen. They could have been fishermen. That's a whole, they skipped that whole part of my section because educated rabbis were required to apply a manual trade. So we have rabbis are sandal makers, carpenters, etc. They were also literate, educated people. And so they could be fishermen as well. So that being a fisherman does not mean you're illiterate. And that was another argument that I made and they ignored. But anyway, the point being is that the evidence is very clear that it is impossible for the apostles to have been illiterate. And Kipp Davis's response is that I haven't read the literature on literacy. And my whole argument is based on the literature on illiteracy, ancient literacy, right? So it just really just fucking flipped my lid when I heard this. It's like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Clearly, he has not read any of the literature on this. He doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, and yet he acts like he does. It's very frustrating, and it's hard to like maintain a jovial attitude about it. But anyway, that's what happened. And yeah, I do cite that scholarship in, I don't cite Hetzer, but I do cite Harris, I think, in on the historicity of Jesus when I talk about this.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the one thing that Kipp didn't do in this is that he didn't finish like his thought there, because like he says, I went to check Carey to see if he cited any of the most recent stuff, and then he goes into like what he knows about the ancient literacy studies and all that, and he never comes back around and says Carrier cited these people for it, or he says this about it.
Well, it sounds like, so here's the bullshit. Here's my bullshit analysis. The bullshit, he only mentions Hetzer. So he doesn't know about Crebiori, Harris, or any of the other authors in this field. So he only knows Hetzer. He just checked if I cited Hetzer. There's no reason to cite Hetzer. That she doesn't say anything that changes anything regarding what Harris said, right? Also, we're talking about Greek. So, Paul is writing in Greek and so forth. So we're really talking Harris, not Hetzer. But it is true, like it would be relevant. Like if Hetzer found something different than Harris regarding education in Hebrew, then that would be relevant, right? But she didn't. So there isn't any reason to cite her on this. But yeah, like I could totally add her to the bibliography on the historicity of Jesus. It wouldn't change any conclusion in there. It wouldn't change this argument either. But I think he just threw her name out. Kipp likes to do this. He likes to throw names out to suggest that somehow it's relevant, that it's not in my bibliography, therefore I don't know about it. And it somehow contradicts what I said, even though it doesn't. He does this a lot, where he tries to name drop, but when you go check the names, they don't say what he said. And anyway, I don't cite Hetzer, but I do cite Harris, who's like I said, nothing different from Hetzer in terms of the results that we're talking about here. All
right, so the next section that we got is our favorite topic, and that's Daniel Boyarin, because Boyarin gets brought up, and so we're going to listen to see what issues do they have with Boyarin now.
Oh, but let's pause for a moment. I don't think Boyarin is even relevant to the article that they are supposed to be talking about. So I want to emphasize that, like, this is fun, but we're changing they're changing the subject again. Now somehow we've gotten off. Like it's like, I don't know, like a cat with a shiny object. It's very difficult to get them to focus on the article they're supposed to be talking about. They rarely do. Like in the whole video, like they touch on it occasionally, but most of the video is these random tangents, like Boyarin, different article. Anyway, so yeah, proceed. But this is what they say.
Yeah, well, I think that the context for this is that Kipp is bringing up what he calls yet another point that proves that basically you're incompetent at your job.
Yeah. He always frames it that way, and then I disprove him by citing dozens of scholars agreeing with me, and then he like claims that, oh, well, that doesn't matter.
I've pointed this out publicly before too. Is I don't think this is so much an issue with scholars failing to check or to confirm their own ideas, so much as I think many times Carrier's tendency to read some of the background literature on this, the secondary source work, can be poor or just outright misleading. He continues to promote this idea on the basis of something he read in a popular book written by Daniel Boyarin with regards to the early Jewish background of the suffering servant as a messianic figure.
A popular book. Oh, it's just a popular book. It's not replicated by dozens of peer-reviewed scholars. Yeah.
whatsoever. And it apparently doesn't matter like I guess the prestige aspect of Daniel
He's one
Boyarin.
of the leading experts on Talmudic studies at UC Berkeley. And I mean, in the world, but he's at UC Berkeley as a professor. He's no slouch, Daniel Boyarin. He's not some rando. That's particularly funny for him to try to denigrate the book when he's about to try and make a false claim about what the book says. Because I know the rest of the clip because I was there since I happened.
In pre-Christian Judaism. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of a number of other people who have confronted him on this point, he's either not carefully enough reading what Boyarin is trying to say, which is more to do with the fact that we shouldn't be surprised that people came to apply texts like Isaiah 53 to the Christian movement. He's not being careful enough in his evaluation of that to the point that he has a tendency to misrepresent the position.
Kipp Davis is describing himself here, and he doesn't know it. He thinks he's describing me, but he's describing himself. And I hope you have the receipts on this. You have, yeah.
Okay, so I want to read this for everybody, and maybe we could do like a live sort of analysis of what Daniel Boyarin is saying here, because I feel like, excuse my literacy at this point, the idea of a suffering Messiah is present in ancient, medieval, and early modern Judaism. This fact, at the very least, calls into question the truism that the formation and acceptance of this idea by followers of Jesus constituted the necessary and absolute breaking point with the religion of Israel. The suffering Messiah is part and parcel of Jewish tradition from antiquity to modernity. Not only, then, is the gospel drawing on Jewish tradition, but this idea remained a Jewish one long after Christianity had indeed been separated off in late antiquity.
He also cites Talmudic passages, basically a bunch of things. Yeah. Half the arguments I give on the historicity of Jesus are just restatements of Boyarin. The other half are like, I think, restatements of Hengel. Is it Hengel? I think it's Hengel. But anyway, so I'm just repeating what these experts say.
It's Hengel.
And so Kipp Davis pulls this bullshit. Like, you're misreading that. I'm like, no, I'm not. They're saying literally the same thing I'm saying. It's like, but you know what? I'm going to see are these guys outliers? Like, was I misled? And I checked, and I found something like 3 dozen of these fuckers, super fucking experts in Dead Sea Scrolls and Talmudic studies and stuff, like Major Light, publishing under peer review multiple times, dozens of times, the same things, the same arguments, literally the same arguments that I advance on the historicity of Jesus. It's like gaslighting. Kipp Davis is fucking gaslighting us. He's claiming no one thinks these things. He's completely misread Boyarin. It's like, no, the things I said have been repeated multiple times under peer review, like dozens of times under peer review by actual experts in these subjects. It's not just Boyarin. And which means that Boyarin was correct. Like, he didn't mislead me. I wasn't wrong to trust Boyarin on this. Everything Boyarin said has been vindicated multiple times in the peer-reviewed literature. Kipp Davis doesn't check this shit, and he doesn't want to check this shit. He doesn't care. So he just keeps spewing this bullshit. He's not checking. But he didn't check. There are multiple times that Kipp Davis didn't check, and I caught him badly. And I've done this, like, this is one of them where he claims like no one believes this, and then I found like dozens of scholars under peer review who said exactly the same things I did. He did the same thing unrelated to this, but he did the same thing with the Zechariah quote that I talk about in Philo. He makes these he pontificates these confident assertions about how I got that wrong, and then I find like a dozen scholars who agree with me under peer review, right? So this is what Kipp Davis does. Like, he'll accuse me of incompetence, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll find like a dozen fucking competent scholars and apparently super competent peer reviewers who all approved this stuff multiple fucking times. Like, how many times does it have to pass peer review before you will admit that it is not incompetent, that this is actually a competent expert position widely accepted in the field? And so Kipp Davis does this so often that it literally enrages me. Like, I'm fucking pissed off by this. And I don't have patience for it anymore.
Yeah. And I picked this one particular section right here because it kind of encapsulates the basic point that Boyarin's trying to make. And so I can't fathom somehow we are misrepresenting. Because like if somebody's like, oh, you're misreading that, I'm like, well, am I? And so I go back and I reread it. I make sure I get my wife, KC, she reads it. She's way better at words than I am. I make sure that I understand what he's saying, because like there's no way that Boyarin can make this kind of statement. Oh, the suffering and dying Messiah was not a break in the Israelite religion. It's part and parcel of the religion. So it's like when Christianity came about, whether that's because Jesus came about or people started making shit up, it doesn't really matter. When it came about, it was already in the religion. Like that's what he's saying here. That's just how fucking words work.
Yeah, and you've quoted, that's one quote from his book, but he has others that are even more clear. Like there's one where he says that here it is. This is a quote. This is page 152 spanning 153 in the same book. There is no evidence at all that any late ancient Jews read Isaiah 52 to 53 as referring to anyone but the Messiah. Yet there are several attestations, he says, of reading it messianically. And then he goes into, he cites evidence of it going back even further than that. His quotation is here, like got it here. There remains the case that we have a very strong textual base for the view that the suffering Messiah is based in deeply rooted Jewish texts, early and late. Jews, it seemed, had no difficulty whatever with understanding a Messiah who would vicariously suffer to redeem the world. And, he goes there, you could get quotes after quote. And he does like cite others. Now, there have been other scholars who've taken this, like run this ball even further than Boyarin did. So Boyarin's not alone in this. And there's others who've made even more affirming statements of the fact. But yeah, what Kipp Davis is saying about what Boyarin said is false. Like it's full on false. Boyarin said what I said. Exactly what I wrote on the historicity of Jesus. It's just a rephrasing, it's just a paraphrase of Boyarin and Hengel mainly.
I don't understand why they can't understand that. Like I don't know what's going on here that Kipp reads something completely different from Boyarin.
Well, it's important to note that he ignores all the other scholars that I cite, right? So I have like 36 now, and I remember like there was a Twitter thing where he doesn't want to read them. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to read them. He's not interested in what the truth is. He doesn't care. It's clear. If he cared, he would read and he would like do a video on, oh, this is what I found. I went and checked and all these scholars do say these things. No, he doesn't fucking do that. Like, so what his motives are, right? So even his own dissertation advisor made some arguments similar to mine, right? And I document that. But I document that. And then like there's a thing where he says, oh, well, like he did the thing where he picked Pesh. So there was Pesh, who's a particular scholar way back when, who's on my list of dozens of scholars. He picks Pesh and he says, oh, there's a bunch of guys who said lately that he misinterpreted some of the scrolls. Now, there's two things that are telltale about this. First, he ignored all the other evidence, picked the weak link and attacked it, and claimed that he defeated the entire argument. Notice what I said at the front of this video. It's exactly the same thing. That's what he did. The other thing is he never gave an example that was relevant to the case. So yeah, maybe Pesh got some interpretations wrong, but are any of those interpretations relevant to, for example, George Brooks' arguments that he relied on Pesh? So, and George Brooks can read the scrolls himself. He does not completely relying on Pesh on these things, but he doesn't give any examples of it being relevant, right? He's like, oh, well, someone found some of his interpretations to be wrong. Okay, how is that relevant at all to anything they were talking about? Can you find a specific example where it's relevant to this particular case, where George Brooks, your own dissertation advisor, incompetently fucked up his whole study that he's published multiple times because he relied on one particular thing that Pesh did? Like, can you give us an example? No, we can't, because he doesn't fucking care. He's not going to try. He's not going to find examples. He's not going to publish them. He's not going to talk about them. He's not going to do any of the work. He doesn't care. And I know he doesn't care because if he cared, he would have done all these things by now and would have reported on his results. And so he hasn't. And so he keeps spewing this bullshit where he's like telling lies about what Boyarin said. He's ignoring what all the other dozens of scholars have said. It's this kind of thing that is enraging. And then I don't know why he does this. He doesn't have to, right? Like he could just act like a sane, rational person. And I don't know why he doesn't do that. But, I can't control it. All I can do is document. All I do is document the facts. Here are the facts. You can check them yourself. You don't have to trust my word for it. You shouldn't trust Kipp's word for it. You should check. You should always fucking check. And I guarantee you when you check, everything Davis says about me is going to fall apart. That's why you should check. And anyway, that's my advice for people. Is just check.
I agree. There's a little bit more of this before we get to the next section. I can't remember what's left in it though.
which is not, and it's still not not even a widely held idea. I don't think, on the basis of my reading of the field, that there even was a very strong promotion of ideas like this with regards to texts like Isaiah 53. So quite often, I am puzzled and I am skeptical of the way in which Carrier will read the secondary literature.
Yeah. Okay. So late ancient. Maybe that's what he means. I just wanted to check like what he's saying. I mean, Boyarin literally contradicts him on that, but he might be disagreeing. I don't know. I'm trying to be too charitable. Maybe I shouldn't be charitable anymore. I'm trying to assume that maybe Kipp Davis is secretly, but not telling anyone, admitting that late ancient Jews read Isaiah 52 to 53 as messianic, but earlier Jews didn't. And that's where we get to Hengel, and Hengel's the one who triangulates the evidence that shows that actually they probably did. It's totally fine if Kipp Davis says, I'm not convinced by that evidence. What's not fine for Kipp Davis is to claim that it is incompetent to make that claim, because massively competent people have made that claim multiple times. Like all over the literature, I document, like I said, over a dozen have made this point, and who are way more qualified than me and Kipp Davis combined. So you can't make this you're incompetent argument. You can make the argument that I'm not convinced by it, but that's fine. To try and turn it into this incompetence thing, that's what's bullshit. Total 100% bullshit, and is easily refuted by massive lists of scholars who are massive experts who agree with me on this stuff.
No, good point.
Lots of times I've noticed as well, he'll depend on what I would consider outdated information. I've encountered a couple of instances. One in particular I'm thinking of, where Carrier and mythicists depend on a published translation of a certain text from the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q541, which was made before 2005 on the basis of poor photographs. And in more recent scholarship, now, I mean, we now have available to us these very high quality digital images of all the fragments. I mean, it's readily apparent that there are several places within this fragment that have been mistranscribed, and as a result, mistranslated. And they're significant enough to affect the entire meaning of the entire text. And this is the sort of stuff that hasn't been widely published to this point. It probably should be. But it's the sort of thing that, unless you're right within the guild, and unless you know how to effectively use all the tools, you're going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage. And that's where I feel like very often Richard's work will fall short, because he's already at a disadvantage in his inability to read all the languages, or to carefully enough navigate the literature. I mean, I don't doubt he's doing his best, but it remains a problem.
Yeah, that's funny. That is so funny. First of all, I myself, on the Historicity of Jesus, never use 4Q541. So he's already lying to you about my supposedly relying on 5Q41. I never use it. I don't. So that's not even in on the Historicity of Jesus. So he's off the rails there. But the really embarrassing thing, that he is slagging off his own fucking dissertation advisor, George Brooke, because you know who's the leading expert on 5Q451? Fucking George Brooke. You know who wrote a book about how the 4Q551 attests to use of Isaiah 52 to 53 to imagine a dying or possibly dying. He says, very distinct possibility of dying Messiah, certainly a suffering Messiah concept. George fucking Brooke, Kipp Davis's fucking dissertation advisor. He did, not me. I didn't do that. I don't use 4Q541. The other thing is that Kipp Davis gives no examples, no evidence of his claim. He says, "Oh, it's been radically reinterpreted." Okay, in any relevant way? Have you told your dissertation advisor, George Brooke, about this? Has he written a retraction? What are you talking about, Kipp? Like, what can you give us a specific example of an argument in George Brooks' treatise, which he's republished, actually? Brooke has published it twice. Can you give us an example of where George Brooke, your own dissertation advisor, fucks up the reading of 4Q 541, and therefore his conclusion about all of this, which is based on multiple sections of the text, it's not based on a single reading of a single thing. Can you show us an example of how George Brooke, your own dissertation advisor, is wrong? Give us an example. Now, also explain why you think I'm the one making this argument. This is your dissertation advisor, George Brooke, is making this argument. I don't rely on this text. But it just shows you that every fucking thing Kipp Davis says is fucking false. Like, he's just spinning bullshit out of nowhere. It's like waves his hands and magic unicorns fly around. I just don't understand how he even thinks he knows what he's doing here. But certainly he's not giving the public any useful information. He's giving no examples of what he's talking about. He's misinforming the public. He's claiming I'm using this argument when actually it's other scholars, including his own dissertation advisor, who are making this argument. He's not doing anything that's useful. He's just trying to slag people off. And that to me looks like evasive distraction behavior rather than actually engaging with the material. Case in point, none of this has anything to do with the article that they are supposed to be talking about. This is another example where he's just gone off on this side rant that has 15 things false and wrong about it, and yet it's still not even relevant. It has nothing to do with the article of mine that they're supposed to be talking about in this video. And so here you see that happen, right? You see this apologetic, broken epistemology, this certain methodology that they're engaging in. It's rhetorical, it's illogical, it's counterfactual, it's dishonest, and that's what they're doing. And I why they're doing it, I leave it up to the public to figure out.
I find that both McGrath and Kipp seem to be very dishonest throughout the entire interview that they did. It was really hard for me to get through it, but I listened to it at least twice so that I could pull out all the relevant clips.
Thank you for your service.
I'm dead.